Whitmore Grand had 47 chandeliers. Daniel Reeves had replaced the bulbs in 32 of them. He knew this hotel the way most people never bother to know anything. Its bones, its leaks, its temperamental elevator on the east wing, the water pipe behind Ballroom C that groaned like an old man whenever the heat kicked on past 68 degrees. He knew which service corridor smelled like bleach and which one smelled like grease. He knew which floor tiles were loose. He knew the back entrance that the catering staff used, and the one the security team thought was locked but wasn't. 7 years of maintenance work had turned him into an expert on the building and invisible to the people inside it. Tonight, the Whitmore Grand was hosting the Hale Foundation Charity Gala. Black SUVs queued outside. Women in gowns that cost more than Daniel's monthly rent glided through the revolving doors. Men in tuxedos laughed at things that weren't that funny. The ballroom on the 4th floor had been transformed white lilies, gold centerpieces, a string quartet playing something classical near the window. $120,000 raised for children's hospitals, the program said. Daniel wasn't reading the program. He was on his knees behind a pillar in the service hallway, replacing a burned-out fuse on the lighting panel. Because if he didn't fix it in the next 6 minutes, the west side of the ballroom would go dark, and his supervisor, Gary, would lose his mind. His phone buzzed. He already knew who it was. "Dad, when are you coming home?" He typed back with one hand. "Late, buddy. Mrs. Kowalski is there." "You eaten?" 3 dots. Then, "Yeah, she made the weird soup again." Daniel smiled in the dark behind the pillar. His son, Connor, 9 years old, red-haired like his mother, suspicious of all soups, was safe and fed, and probably doing battle with his math homework. That was enough. That had to be enough. He pocketed his phone and got back to work. He was 34 years old. His knees were bad. His right shoulder had a scar from a rescue operation he wasn't supposed to talk about at family dinners. Except there were no more family dinners. Sarah had been gone 3 years. Breast cancer, fast and merciless, the kind that doesn't announce itself until it's already done most of the damage. He'd spent the first year after her death in a kind of gray fog, working double shifts because work kept him from thinking, and thinking was dangerous for a while. He came back for Connor. He always came back for Connor. The fuse box clicked. The lights on the west side of the ballroom hummed back to life. Daniel gathered his tools, straightened up, and slipped back through the service corridor like he'd never been there at all. He first noticed the little girl at 9:47. She was standing near the far edge of the ballroom, close to the floor-to-ceiling windows that opened onto the covered balcony. She was small, maybe 7, maybe 8, wearing a white dress with a sash that was slowly coming undone in the back. Her dark hair had been pinned up, but pieces of it were falling loose. She was holding a glass of sparkling water with both hands and watching the room like someone who had been told to stand there and be good, and had been standing there and being good for a very long time. Nobody was watching her. Daniel had been a rescue worker long enough to notice the small things that meant something was wrong before the something wrong actually happened. It wasn't a sixth sense. It was pattern recognition. A child alone at the edge of a crowd, near glass doors that opened onto a balcony with a railing that was decorative rather than structural, that was a pattern. He filed it away and kept moving. At 10:14, he saw her again. She had moved to the balcony. The woman in the red dress was named Victoria Hale. Everyone in the room knew who she was. Some of them were afraid of her. Some of them wanted something from her. Some of them were both. She was 37. The founder and CEO of Hale Capital, a private equity firm that had restructured 43 companies in the last decade and made a fortune doing it. She had the kind of face that looked like it had decided something a long time ago and wasn't interested in reopening the question. Precise cheekbones, dark eyes that clocked everything at once. She did not smile unless she meant it. She had been married once. His name had been Michael. The divorce, or what she told the world was a divorce, had happened when Emma was 2 years old. She had not spoken publicly about it since. She did not discuss her personal life. She did not accept advice about work-life balance. She did not respond well to being told she seemed tired. She was in conversation with the director of the Whitmore Foundation when her assistant, a sharp-eyed young woman named Candace, touched her elbow. "Mrs. Hale, Emma's on the balcony." Victoria turned. She could see the balcony through the open glass doors, a narrow terrace that ran along the north face of the building, fourth floor, with a decorative wrought iron railing that curved outward in a gentle arc. Good for photographs, not designed with children in mind. She began moving. She was 20 feet away when she heard Emma scream. The bracelet had slipped. That was all it was, at first. Emma had leaned against the railing to get a better look at the lights on the street below, and the thin silver bracelet her mother had given her last Christmas had slipped off her wrist and caught on the outer edge of the railing's decorative curl. She reached for it. The railing was low. She was small, and then she was on the wrong side of it. She hadn't fallen. Not exactly. She was hanging there, fingers locked around the railing's top bar, feet dangling over nothing, 40 feet above the hotel's covered side entrance. Below her, two guests who had stepped outside for air saw her and went rigid with shock. The ballroom erupted. People rushed toward the balcony doors and then stopped, because there was nothing to do, because none of them knew how to do anything except stand in expensive clothes and watch. Someone called 911. Someone was shouting for security. The string quartet had stopped playing. Daniel was already running. He had been in the service corridor 20 yards from the balcony doors when he heard the scream, short and sharp and high, the specific frequency of a child in genuine terror. He dropped his toolkit without thinking. His body remembered things before his mind did. He was through the glass doors in 4 strides. He took in the situation in less than a second. Emma, railing, both hands, slipping. The balcony was narrow, 5 feet wide at most. The railing's outer curve extended about 18 inches over the drop. To reach her, he would have to go over the railing himself, brace against the exterior face of the building, and grab her. He didn't weigh the options. There weren't any. He went over. Later, people who watched the video would describe it differently. Some said it looked effortless. Some said it looked insane. What it actually was, and Daniel knew this precisely because he'd done variations of it on burning rooftops and flood-damaged bridges, was controlled. Weight distribution. One hand on the railing, both feet against the building's stone facing. Center of gravity back, not forward. He'd done it in worse conditions. Never in dress shoes, though. Dress shoes were a mistake. His left foot slipped. For 1 second, one very clear, very cold second, he was looking down at the roof of a parked car 40 feet below him. And he was aware that if he fell, Connor would be alone in the world. He did not fall. He hooked his right elbow around the railing's post, redistributed, and reached Emma with his left hand. "I've got you," he said. His voice came out steady. He'd learned a long time ago that the voice had to stay steady. "I've got you. Let go of the bar and grab my arm." "I can't." "Yes, you can. Look at my face. Look right here. Grab my arm." She looked at his face. She grabbed his arm. He pulled her up in a single motion, over the railing, and they landed together on the balcony floor. Daniel took the impact on his shoulder, already bad, worse now, and kept her from hitting the ground. She was shaking. He could feel her whole body shaking, the way people shook when the adrenaline hadn't finished yet, when the terror was still trying to get out through every pore at once. He held on. "You're okay," he said. "You're okay. I've got you." The crowd behind the glass doors had gone completely silent. Then, Emma's arms locked around his neck and she started crying, and the crowd was no longer silent. Victoria pushed through the people clustered at the balcony door. She saw Emma. Emma was alive. Her daughter was alive and unhurt, and clinging to a man in a gray maintenance uniform who was sitting on the balcony floor holding her, and everything in Victoria's chest that had been locked up for the last 45 seconds with nowhere to go came surging back as something hot and wrong and looking for a target. She crossed the balcony in 3 steps. "Emma, Emma, come here." Emma didn't let go. Victoria looked at the man. He had dark hair, a calm face, and a name badge that read Daniel Maintenance. He was looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not defiant, not afraid, just present. "Thank you," she made herself say. The words came out clipped. "She's okay," Daniel said. Give her a second. Something in the way he said it, give her a second, like he was telling her how to hold her own daughter, made Victoria's jaw tighten. Candace, her assistant, was already at her side. Get security. I want his identification verified. Daniel blinked. I'm sorry? Your name badge, your employee record. I want it verified. She kept her voice low. The crowd behind the glass was watching. Cameras were already up. I don't know you. I don't know what you were doing out here. Mom. Emma's voice was muffled against Daniel's shoulder. Mom, stop. Emma. He saved me. Emma finally lifted her head. Her face was tear-streaked, her hair completely loose now, but her eyes were clear, and they were looking at her mother with something that wasn't quite accusation, but wasn't far from it. He saved me. Why are you being like that? Two members of hotel security arrived at the glass doors. Victoria looked at them, looked at Daniel. I'd like to speak with you privately, she said, and her tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Daniel set Emma carefully on her feet, stood up, and said, Sure. He was calm. That was what bothered her most. He was completely calm. The private conversation happened in a small antechamber off the main corridor, a room with 2 chairs and a table and a mirror and nothing else. The kind of room hotels keep for negotiations of various kinds. Security stood outside the door. Victoria sat. Daniel didn't, which she noticed. He stood near the door with his hands at his sides. And she understood that he wasn't going to be intimidated into sitting down just because she wanted him to. She had already called Candace for his employment records. How long have you worked at this hotel? She asked. 7 years. You have a background in emergency response. I did. I left the fire department 4 years ago. Why? A pause. Personal reasons. Your name is Daniel Reeves. She was reading from her phone. Candace was fast. 34 years old, single father. 1 child, Connor, age 9. No criminal record, no civil litigation. Formerly employed by the Clearwater County Fire and Rescue, where you were involved in. She scrolled 14 documented rescues over 3 years, including a bridge collapse recovery. She looked up. Commendations. I don't really collect those. No, I see that. She set her phone down. I owe you an apology. The words came out before she'd fully decided to say them. She noticed that too. I reacted badly, she said. I was scared. I'm not excusing it. I'm explaining it. You don't need to explain it, Daniel said. Your kid was in danger. People don't act rationally when their kids are in danger. Something shifted slightly in Victoria's face. You have a son. Yeah. Then you understand. I understand completely. There was a knock at the door. It was Emma, with Candace hovering behind her. Emma had apparently decided the conversation had gone on long enough without her. She walked straight past her mother and stood in front of Daniel with the solemn gravity that certain children carry like an inheritance. What's your name? She asked. Daniel. You didn't let go, Emma said. It was not a thank you. It was a statement of fact, offered the way children offer the things they have decided are important. Most people would have let go. I don't really do that, Daniel said. Emma studied him for a long moment. Then she said, You feel like someone I already know. Victoria went very still. In the car on the way home, Emma fell asleep across the back seat, with her head on Victoria's lap. Victoria sat with one hand resting in her daughter's hair and her phone screen dark in her other hand, and she replayed that sentence over and over. You feel like someone I already know. Emma had her father's way of saying true things without knowing they were heavy. Victoria looked out the window at the city lights. She had not thought about Michael Carter in No. That wasn't honest. She thought about Michael Carter every time she looked at Emma. She just didn't let herself sit with it. The story broke overnight. By morning, the footage from the gala had been seen by an extraordinary number of people. The angle was good. One of the event photographers had been near the glass doors and had caught most of it, including Daniel going over the railing. News sites picked it up fast. By the time Daniel dropped Connor at school and arrived at the Whitmore Grand for his morning shift, there was already a satellite truck parked out front. Gary, his supervisor, met him at the service entrance with an expression caught between pride and administrative anxiety. "You're famous," Gary said. "I'm going to need a new shoulder brace," Daniel said. Gary sent him home for the day. Victoria Hale's office had already called twice. The hotel's PR team wanted a statement. Daniel wrote 3 words on a piece of paper, gave it to Gary, and left. The 3 words were, "He needed help." He meant Emma needed help, but the sentence worked other ways too, and he suspected some editor somewhere would figure that out. At 4 in the afternoon, his buzzer rang. He opened the door to Victoria Hale and Emma Hale, both in civilian clothes, and the faint domestic surreality of this almost made him laugh. "She wanted to come," Victoria said. Her tone was not quite apologetic, but it was making an effort. "I wanted to see where you live," Emma said, walking past him into the apartment without waiting to be invited. Connor, who had been lying on the floor doing homework, looked up at this new development with interest. "I'm Emma," the girl announced. "I'm Connor," said his son. "Do you like dinosaurs?" "I like the ones that were also birds." "Those are the best ones," Connor said, apparently satisfied, and they were friends. Daniel made coffee and set out crackers and cheese that he'd had in the back of the fridge and hoped weren't expired. Victoria sat at his kitchen table with the careful posture of someone who usually sat at tables that cost more than the room around them, trying not to look like she was assessing the apartment. He noticed she was trying and appreciated it. The kids had migrated to Connor's room. Emma's laugh, surprised and unguarded, came through the wall. "She doesn't do that very often," Victoria said. "What? Laugh like that?" "She's usually," Victoria turned the coffee mug in her hands. "She's usually very composed. She learned it from me, which I'm not particularly proud of." Daniel sat across from her. "How old is she?" 8. He nodded. Victoria reached into her bag and set a photograph on the table. It was old, printed on matte photo paper, slightly creased at one corner. A man in his early 30s, outdoors somewhere, laughing at something off camera. Dark eyes, strong jaw. He was wearing a work jacket with a patch on the shoulder that Daniel recognized. He recognized it because he'd worn the same one. The blood drained from his face. "That's Michael," Victoria said. She was watching him carefully. "Emma's father. I need to know if you know him." Daniel looked at the photograph for a long time. "Where did you get that jacket?" he asked. His voice came out differently than he intended. It was his. From before. He was in emergency services, briefly, before she stopped. Before things changed. Daniel set the photograph down on the table. "Michael Carter," he said. Victoria went very still. "You know him." "I knew him," Daniel said. "We worked the same station. Clearwater County, about 8 years ago." He pressed his fingers against the edge of the photograph. "He was the best person I have ever worked with, bar none. He pulled me out of a collapsed parking structure in 2017 when 3 other guys decided the structure was too unstable to go in. He went in anyway." He looked up. "I've been looking for him for 6 years." The kitchen was very quiet. From Connor's room, Emma laughed again. He told Victoria what he knew over the next hour. In pieces, the way you tell someone something when you're not sure how much of it they can hold at once. Michael had been a good man, and a strange one, brilliant and restless. The kind of person who was always looking at the edges of things. He'd left the fire department abruptly in late 2018. No notice, no explanation. Daniel had tried to find him, called mutual contacts. Checked the networks and hit nothing but walls. He'd assumed the worst, eventually. People who disappeared that completely usually had good reasons, and good reasons usually meant bad circumstances. Victoria listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "He didn't leave voluntarily." "What do you mean?" "I mean someone made him leave." She paused. "There was a company. Before I started Hale Capital, Michael was the CFO of a private investment firm called Meridian Group. He found evidence of systematic fraud, the kind that reaches up into government contracts." She looked at the photograph, then away. "The people running it threatened our family. Not metaphorically. They were specific. I was pregnant with Emma." Daniel sat with that. He said he'd deal with it, Victoria continued. Instead, he disappeared. He sent me papers. A cover story. He made it look like a divorce to protect us from whatever he thought was coming. Her voice was very controlled. Emma never knew. I told her he was gone. I didn't say dead. I said, gone. I thought. She stopped again. I thought if I kept the door cracked open, she could deal with it better. That's why she asks about him, Daniel said. She asks about him constantly. She built an entire version of him in her head from old photographs and things I told her when she was very little. She finally looked at Daniel directly. She said, you feel like someone she already knows. She's described her father to me the same way she described you tonight. Daniel had no answer for that. He found out later, much later, putting the sequence together that Emma had been listening in the hallway. She was 8. She was very quiet when she wanted to be. She had her father's gift for stillness. She heard, Michael Carter. She heard, he's alive. She heard, he left to protect his family. And then Connor called her for dinner, and she sat at the table and ate pasta with extraordinary composure, while the adults talked about inconsequential things, and nobody saw what she was carrying. She ran at 11 that night. Victoria called Daniel at 11:23. Her voice, stripped of everything it usually wore, sounded like someone standing at the edge of something they cannot see the bottom of. She's gone, Victoria said. I went to check on her, and she's gone. The rain had started at 10, not a gentle rain, the kind with a purpose, driving and cold, the kind that turns the streets of a city into something slightly hostile. Daniel had his truck running in 4 minutes. He met Victoria at the end of her block, and she was standing in the rain without an umbrella, and she didn't comment on it. She got in the passenger seat. What was she wearing? He asked. Her pajamas. Blue ones. And she took her sneakers from the front hall. Does she have a destination? He was already driving. Somewhere she talks about? Somewhere that matters to her? Victoria closed her eyes. She has a book. Her father gave it to me before he left to read to her. It's a children's book about a lighthouse keeper. She loves the waterfront. She's always wanted to go to the harbor. Daniel turned east. They drove in silence for a minute. The rain hammered the windshield. Daniel drove the way he did most things, with focus, but without urgency, which was its own kind of urgency. She heard us, Victoria said. Yeah, I should have known. She's exactly like him. He could sit in a room and hear a conversation 2 rooms over. She pressed her fingers against her mouth for a moment. I don't know how to protect her from this. You can't, Daniel said. Not from this. This one she has to know about. Victoria looked at him. She's been carrying the shape of her father her whole life, he said. She deserves to know what the shape actually is. They were quiet again. Then Victoria said, You have a son. Yeah. What do you tell him? About her mother. The truth, Daniel said. Different amounts at different ages, but always the truth. He slowed for a red light. Kids smell dishonesty the same way they smell dinner. Long before it gets to the table. Victoria looked at her hands. She said, You feel like someone she already knows, she said again. I've been thinking about it since you said his name. Michael talked about a man he'd worked with. Someone he trusted completely. He talked about him the way he didn't talk about most people. She paused. He told Emma stories. I assumed they were invented. The stories were about a man who didn't run away from burning buildings. The light changed. Daniel looked at the road ahead. He told her about me, he said quietly. I think so. Before he disappeared. She was 2, but she remembers more than 2-year-olds are supposed to. She looked out the window. She always told me, Daddy had a friend who was brave. She said it like it explained something. They found the bracelet first, lying on the wet pavement at the edge of the harbor walk, near the storm gate that the city had locked in 2019 when the old warehouse district flooded. The silver chain with the small star charm, the one Emma had nearly died trying to retrieve the night before. Daniel picked it up, held it. She came this way, he said. The Harlow warehouse had been condemned for 2 years. The gate had a padlock. but one of the fence sections had pulled loose at the bottom, a gap a child could fit through. Daniel's flashlight found the footprints in the mud, small, headed inside. He went through the fence. Victoria was one step behind him. The warehouse was 3 stories of deteriorating concrete and rusted steel, and the roof at the far end had partially collapsed the previous winter. Daniel could hear the rain finding gaps, hear the building settling, hear all the small warnings that buildings give when they're done tolerating weight. He called Emma's name. A pause. Then, "I'm up here, 3rd floor." The interior stairs were intact, but compromised. Daniel took them one at a time, testing each step, one hand on Victoria's arm, to direct her around the bad ones. The flashlight cut white through the dark. They found Emma in the corner of the 3rd floor, sitting on a dry section of concrete beneath a section of roof that was still solid, knees pulled to her chest, shoes soaked through. She had her father's book in her hands. She'd taken it from her room on the way out, apparently. She looked up at them with an expression that was exhausted and stubborn in equal measure. "I knew you'd find me," she said to Daniel. "How'd you know that?" "Because that's what you do." Victoria crossed the floor and knelt in front of her daughter and didn't say anything. Just held her face in both hands and looked at her for a long moment. "I heard," Emma said. "I know. Is he really alive?" Victoria closed her eyes. "We don't know for certain," Daniel said from behind them, "but we're going to find out." A sound from above them. Not rain. Something structural. A deep creak, followed by a subsonic shudder that Daniel felt in his feet before he heard it. He crossed the floor in 6 steps, grabbed Emma under one arm and Victoria's wrist with his other hand, and moved. He was 3 feet from the stairwell when the roof section came down, not all of it. A 10 by 12 section of corroded steel and waterlogged concrete. Exactly where they'd been standing. It hit the floor with a sound like a car wreck and sent a cloud of plaster dust and debris rolling across the space. Daniel had Emma, and he had Victoria, and he was already on the stairs. They got out. In the ambulance because Victoria called one and he didn't fight her on it. Emma sat with a foil blanket around her shoulders and her bracelet back on her wrist, and she looked at Daniel with his arm in a temporary sling and said, "Does it hurt?" "A little. You got hurt because of me. Twice. I got hurt because buildings are occasionally untrustworthy," Daniel said. "That's not on you." Emma looked at him for another moment. "Why do you keep saving me?" she asked. "Because you needed saving. But you don't even know me." Daniel looked at the bracelet on her wrist. "Your dad knew me," he said. "A long time ago. I think that counts for something." Emma looked down at her bracelet. Outside, the rain was easing off. Victoria was standing in the ambulance bay, talking to the paramedic, and through the open doors, Daniel could see her the way her shoulders had come down, the specific physical change that happens when someone who has held themselves rigid for a very long time finally allows gravity to do its work. "She's different than she seems," Emma said, watching her mother. "Most people are. She's been scared for a long time. She just doesn't want anyone to see it." "I know. She likes you," Emma added, with the devastating directness of a child. Daniel looked at the ambulance ceiling. "Emma," he said carefully. "I can just tell," she said. "It's fine. I'm just saying." He told Victoria the whole story the next morning, in a coffee shop 3 blocks from her building, both of them slightly running on no sleep. He told her about the parking structure, the call that came in partial collapse, possible trapped civilians, structure rated unstable, how most of his team had assessed it and pulled back, waiting for engineers, how Michael Carter had looked at the assessment, looked at the building, and walked in anyway, how Daniel had followed him in because he would not let the man go alone, how they'd found 2 survivors, how the secondary collapse had come while they were still inside, how Michael had been the one who got him out of the rubble, not the other way around. "Before we got separated," Daniel said, "he said something to me. I thought at the time it was just the kind of thing people say when they're not sure whether they're going to make it out." "What did he say?" "He said, 'If something happens to me, remember there's a family somewhere that doesn't know they need protecting yet. I need someone who doesn't run.'" Victoria stared at her coffee. "He knew," she said. "I think he knew something was coming." I don't think he knew exactly what. Daniel turned his cup. But he knew you. He knew Emma, even if she wasn't born yet. And he was telling someone, leaving a marker, and then he disappeared, and you never connected it. I had no way to connect it. I didn't know your name. I didn't know Emma existed. I just carried the thing he said, and looked for him when I could. He paused. I used to think maybe he'd found me. Used to watch the news when rescues got covered, wondering if he'd reach out. He might have been watching, Victoria said. Yeah. She was quiet for a moment. Then her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer it. She answered it. A long pause on the line. Then a man's voice, low and careful and wearing 6 years of weight. Victoria. She pressed her back against the booth seat. Across the table, Daniel watched her face change, watched something crack open behind her eyes that she'd had sealed for a very long time. Michael, she said. He was outside when she got there, standing on the sidewalk in front of her building, wearing a gray jacket and looking older than his photographs. Which was the most honest thing about him. He had the same jaw, the same dark eyes, the same quality of presence that Emma had apparently absorbed through some mechanism that skipped the 5 years she hadn't seen him. Victoria stopped on the sidewalk 6 feet away. They looked at each other. I watched the footage, Michael said. Of the gala. I knew who he was the second I saw him. You've been watching us. I've always been watching you. From a distance. Because I thought that was safer. He looked down briefly, then back up. I was wrong about that for a long time. You were wrong, Victoria said. Her voice was not raised. The flatness of it was worse. You were wrong about leaving. You were wrong about the distance. You were wrong about... She stopped. Emma thought you were dead. She didn't know she thought that. But she built a whole architecture to explain your absence, and half of it was about not knowing whether to grieve you or wait for you. Michael said nothing. She's 8 years old, Victoria said. She's been carrying that since she was 2. I know. You don't know. A pause. You know the shape of it. You don't know what it sounds like at 2 in the morning when she can't sleep, and she wants to ask questions I don't have answers to. Michael closed his eyes. I'm here, he said. I'm not going anywhere. The situation that forced me out, it's resolved. The people behind Meridian were arrested 8 months ago. I've been working through channels to get back safely. And it's done. He opened his eyes. I'm here. Whatever it takes. Victoria looked at him for a long time. Emma found out the same way she found out most things, by being somewhere the adults forgot she could be. She had been staying with Daniel and Connor for the morning, while Victoria dealt with the phone call. An arrangement that had somehow become natural in the previous 12 hours. When Candace texted Victoria's whereabouts to Daniel with the simple message she's outside with him, Daniel had done something he'd debate later. He let Emma read the text. She was 8. She deserved to know. Emma read the text, set the phone on the table, sat very still for approximately 4 seconds. Then she said, I need to go. I know, Daniel said. He drove her. She came around the corner of the building and stopped 10 feet from Michael, who had not yet seen her. Victoria had. Victoria's face did something complicated and then simplified. Michael turned. If he'd been wearing 6 years of weight before, the weight was different now. It rearranged itself into something that had no name in normal language, the specific gravity of a parent who has spent years watching from a distance, who has held the idea of a child in their mind like something fragile, and who is now looking at the actual child and discovering that the actual child exceeds all estimates. Emma didn't run. She walked, slowly, with the same gravity she'd had on the balcony when she'd assessed Daniel and decided he was trustworthy. She stopped in front of him. Are you my dad? She asked. Yes, Michael said. A beat. You knew Daniel, Emma said. From before. Michael looked over her head at Daniel, who was standing on the sidewalk with his hands in his jacket pockets. And something passed between them that had been waiting 6 years to pass. He was the bravest person I ever worked with, Michael said. Emma looked at Daniel. Then she walked back to him and took his hand, and she turned around and looked at her parents. And she said, then he should be here, for all of it. She was 8. She'd said it like she was resolving something that should have been resolved already, because to her, it was that simple. She'd needed somebody brave, and Daniel had been there, and her father had known Daniel was brave, and therefore everything was accounted for, and they could all move forward. Adults built long roads to conclusions that children walked straight to. Nobody argued with her. It would have been a cleaner ending if that had been the end. It wasn't. The men from Meridian Group, some of them had not been arrested. The CFO had been, and 2 board members. But the operation had other branches. And those branches had spent 8 months watching Michael Carter work toward re-emergence, because Michael Carter knew things about their financing structure that were not in any prosecutor's file. Daniel found out about this in the least elegant way possible. A black sedan parked across from the Hale house for 2 consecutive days that didn't belong in the neighborhood. He'd spent 3 years in fire and rescue, and 4 years maintaining buildings, and somewhere in between, he'd developed a persistent habit of noticing things that were wrong before they became emergencies. He'd gotten Connor to Mrs. Kowalski. He'd called Michael. Michael had not been entirely surprised. "I was hoping we had more time," Michael said. "How long have you known?" "3 days. And you didn't tell Victoria." "I was assessing." "Michael," Daniel said. "She spent 6 years being kept in the dark for her own protection. You understand that this is not the way to start." A long pause. "No," Michael said. "You're right. It happened on a Tuesday evening. 2 men, side door of the Hale property, while the security system was running a scheduled maintenance cycle. It was professional, and it was timed, and it would have worked on most households. It did not work on this one, because Michael was inside, because Daniel was in the back garden on the other side of the house, and because Victoria, who had run a 43-company private equity firm through a decade of hostile competition, and had not survived that by being naive, had noticed the sedan herself on day 2, and had spent day 3 making preparations. She had also, it turned out, been a competitive fencer in college. This information had not come up in previous conversation. The confrontation was brief and violent, and ended with the assistance of 3 patrol cars that Victoria had arranged to be nearby in advance. One of the men got away initially, and was detained 6 blocks east. The other did not attempt to leave. Daniel and Michael were both, depending on one's definition, fine, which is to say, walking and in possession of all their faculties, with an assortment of bruises that would make the next week uncomfortable. Victoria had a cut on her forearm, and was in considerably better shape than either of them. "Fencing," Daniel said, looking at her. "Regional champion, 2005 and 2006, she said. "Right." She was wrapping her own arm with a first aid kit, with the focused precision of someone who was not going to let the shaking in her hands be visible until she was alone. Daniel noticed it. He didn't say anything about it, which she noticed. Emma and Connor were at Mrs. Kowalski's apartment and knew nothing. The investigation took 4 months. The remaining elements of the Meridian operation were dismantled over the course of a federal inquiry that Michael had been building toward for 2 years. The arrests were made quietly, the way consequential things often are. Life in the interim was strange, and then gradually ordinary. Michael rented an apartment 6 blocks from Victoria's house. He spent time with Emma every day. He learned what he had missed, not just her years, but her specifics. All the detail that photographs and surveillance footage and second-hand reports can't carry. Her specific laugh. The way she thought about things, in long arcs before speaking. Her opinion about which dinosaurs were best. The book with the lighthouse keeper that she now allowed him to read to her at bedtime, even though she'd had the text memorized for 2 years. Victoria and Michael were not reconciled in the simple narrative sense. They were not enemies. They had a daughter and a complicated history and a great deal to work through at whatever pace it required. Sometimes they had dinner together, the 4 of them and Connor. And sometimes they were simply 2 parents with shared custody of an exceptional child. What they had was time, possibly, if they chose to use it. Daniel went back to work at the Whitmore Grand. Gary, who had been anxiously fielding press inquiries for 4 months, seemed to regard his return as a personal gift from the universe. The hotel had offered Daniel a promotion facilities manager, twice the pay, off the floor. He'd accepted. He'd been managing the facilities unofficially for years anyway. Nobody seemed to have noticed. His shoulder required physical therapy. which he found inconvenient and attended anyway. His mornings included Connor, who had opinions about breakfast, and his evenings included homework and the occasional dinner with Emma and Michael and Victoria, which had become, in an organic and unremarkable way, a recurring thing. In November, Victoria Hale's Foundation announced a new program, the Carter Reeves Emergency Response Scholarship, funding training for 20 rescue workers per year. The name had been Emma's suggestion, delivered with the tone of someone conveying a decision that had already been made. Daniel had tried to decline having his name on it. Emma had given him a look. He'd let it go. The picnic happened on a Saturday in late October, in Hargrove Park, which was close enough to the harbor to smell the water on a wind day. Michael had brought the food, which turned out to be a strength nobody had known about him. Victoria had brought a blanket that cost too much to be on grass, and was lying on it anyway. Connor had brought his whole personality, which was substantial. Emma was sitting in the middle of all of it, watching everything, the way she did. She waited until the afternoon light was the specific gold that it goes in October, and then she sat down next to Daniel, who was eating a sandwich and looking at the water. "Do heroes ever get tired?" she asked. He thought about it seriously. Because she deserved that. "Sure," he said. "All the time. What do they do when they're tired?" He looked around at the blanket on the grass, at Connor trying to explain something to Michael with the urgency children reserve for things that matter to them, at Victoria, who was almost smiling, which was becoming more frequent and suited her. "They sit down," he said, "and they let other people take a turn." Emma considered this. "Is that what you're doing now?" "Yeah, I think so." She leaned her head against his arm. "Okay," she said, "that's allowed." Later, when the light had gone amber, and the temperature had dropped enough that Connor was asking about hot chocolate, with the persistence of a small, determined attorney, Daniel watched Michael and Victoria stand side by side watching the harbor. Not touching, not talking, just standing in the particular proximity of people who have a long way to go but have decided to go it. Emma was beside him again. "Is it okay?" she asked. She was looking at her parents. "Yeah," Daniel said. "I think it is. It's not like the stories," she said. "No, it's better than the stories." She looked up at him with her father's dark eyes and her mother's precision. "Because it's real?" she asked. "Because it's real," he said. She thought about that. "I'm glad you were at the hotel," she said. "Me too, even though it was really scary, especially because it was scary." She went back to her parents then, slipping her hand into her father's, and Michael looked down at her, and Daniel saw from 30 feet away, in the October light, the specific expression of a man who has been given back something he did not know how to ask for. He didn't need to be any closer to understand it. He felt it himself. Sometimes, when Connor fell asleep in the car, and Daniel carried him inside, and set him in his bed, and stood in the doorway for a moment in the dark, there was a version of love that was just the determination not to leave. Not a declaration. Not a ceremony. Just the daily accumulated weight of staying. He understood it. He suspected, looking at all of them on the blanket in the October light, that they all did. Connor appeared at his elbow. "Hot chocolate," Connor said. It was not a question. "Hot chocolate," Daniel agreed. They walked toward the park kiosk, Connor's hand in his, and the sound of the others followed behind them, and the harbor glittered in the last of the light.